in this passage. Acts, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 through 10. Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. And a certain man lame from his mother's womb was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms of them that entered into the temple. Who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked an alms. And Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, Look on us. And he gave heed unto them, expecting to receive something of them. Then Peter said, Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the right hand and lifted him up. And immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. And leaping up, he stood and walked and entered into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. All the people saw him walking and praising God. And they knew that it was he which sat for alms at the beautiful gate of the temple. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at that which had happened unto him. To me, this is a very interesting passage of Scripture. A very interesting event that is taking place here. And something that I believe that we can learn a lot from. And I've been wanting to talk about this passage for some time. And so tonight I'd like to begin over the next couple of Sunday evenings to study this particular passage. And when you are talking about this particular passage, the first thing that you really got to stop and you've got to consider or think about is the city of Jerusalem itself. Now you may wonder, now why talk about Jerusalem? Well, the city actually plays a part in the first few verses of this passage. Now somebody, if I was to ask you to describe Jerusalem, how would you describe it? How would you describe Jerusalem? Jerusalem was in fact just like many other cities at that day and time. Jerusalem was what? Well, Jerusalem was a walled city. Just like many of the cities, all the other cities that existed in that time. In fact, Jerusalem today is still a walled city. In fact, there are more walls than in the picture that we have here. This is a depiction of Jerusalem at the time of Christ and shortly thereafter. Jerusalem has been a city that has grown throughout the years. In fact, when David was king, Jerusalem was only this little walled portion right here. And then it grew and continued to grow. And so today it has even more walls that come up and around the city of Jerusalem. Now, what is the purpose of a wall?
Protection.
Okay, protection. Protection from who?
Enemy.
Okay, a protection from an enemy. Protection from an army. And the walls of Jerusalem provided that protection. But it wasn't just the walls that provided protection. Is Jerusalem built on flat ground? Anybody know?
Because hills are rocky.
Okay, Jerusalem is actually built on 3 hills. And if you have hills, then you also have what? You also have valleys. And there are 3 valleys in which the city is either built around or even on top of. You have the Kidron Valley, which is here to the east, goes all the way down to the east. That protects that whole entire side of the city from an army. To the south and the southwest and west is the Minden Valley. And going through the actual city is the Tripone Valley. And so those valleys are added protection against enemies. In fact, the only way that an army could feasibly attack Jerusalem was from the north. Because of Minion Valley, because of the Kidron Valley, they're not going to attack from the south or the east or the west. They can only attack from the north. Now, being a walled city, that means there would have to be some what in those walls? There would have to be gates. Now, why would there have to be gates in Jerusalem?
You got to get in and you got to get out.
Okay, the people got to come and to go. And so they're going to need gates. And there were several gates on the outward wall of that city and also gates in the inward wall. Just on the outward wall, there were a total of 9 gates at this particular time. Now, somebody might say, well, how do you know that? Well, Josephus tells us that, the historian. He tells us that there were 9 gates that surrounded the city at this time. There were 4 gates on the south. There were 4 gates on the west. There were 4 gates across the north. And only 1 gate to the east. And that is what has been listed as the Golden Gate. But there is perhaps another gate that is even more famous than the Golden Gate. And that's the gate that Luke speaks of here. The Beautiful Gate. Now, does anybody know where the Beautiful Gate was located? Anybody know? We can make a pretty good guess, but even today, scholars debate about it. Now, somebody might wonder, why do they debate about it? Well, you got to remember that in AD 70, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. And so they destroyed the Beautiful Gate. And so we, to this day, do not know exactly where that Beautiful Gate could be. Many scholars have speculated, and I think even Acts chapter 3 gives us a little bit of an idea where that Beautiful Gate was located at. But there are some scholars who say, well, that Beautiful Gate was actually the Golden Gate. Well, I think there might be a better idea. Other scholars say that the Beautiful Gate, well, the Beautiful Gate was located here in the temple area that went from the court of the Gentiles into the court of the women. Now, how do we know that, or how can we feel safe that that is the place where it was located? How can we feel safe that that was where it was located?
They were going into the temple.
They were going into the temple. In fact, how many times in the verses that we just read, let's go back here. How many times did we read about entering into the city or entering into the temple? Through the gate. We read there in verse 2, who was laid daily at the gate of what? Of the temple, which is called Beautiful. They asking alms of them that entered into the temple. We go down to verse 10 just for a couple examples here. The Beautiful Gate of the temple. And so we have a pretty good idea. And I believe, friends, that the Beautiful Gate is the one that is indicated to us in this particular map. The Beautiful Gate entering into the temple area. Now, why was it called the Beautiful Gate? Okay.
Someone said because of one of the readers read it, said because of its location, you could look down and see the valley entrance.
Okay, that you can see the Valley of Kindred.
It was because I normally stood right there.
You normally stood right there, and what's that got to do with it?
That would have been the reason, yeah.
Yeah, well, could it be that the name is pretty descriptive of the gate? It's very elaborate. It was, in fact, a very beautiful gate. Now, there were several gates that went into the temple area. And those gates, they were 45 feet high. Wow. What's the height from the floor to the tip of this ceiling? Anybody know?
Somebody step it off.
once you step it on?
About 25.
About 25 feet? Okay, well, imagine another 20 feet onto that. That gate is big, isn't it? And those gates had silver plates. Chuck's counting the blocks. Well, that's how you can tell how many. Chuck's counting the blocks. And so, those gates were overlaid with plates of pure silver and gold. And so all the other gates, they were very beautiful. But the beautiful gate, well, it was a different story. The other gates that went into the temple area, they were 45 feet. The beautiful gate, Josephus tells us, was 75 feet high.
How many people would it take to open and close that?
Huh?
How many people would it take to open and close it?
To open and close it? Yeah.
You probably had a pulley system or something.
Pulling system, they probably had horses, things of that nature. Because it was going to be a very heavy gate just based upon the material that it was made of. Now, what do you think that gate was made of? What do you think? Anybody want to guess? It was actually made of the most precious metal known to man at that time. No, not gold. It was actually made of Corinthian brass. Yeah. Corinthian brass. And portions of that gate, just like the other gates, they were overlaid with plates of even richer and thicker plates of gold and silver. So just imagine that idea, or picture it in your mind, brass and gold and silver. It was indeed a very beautiful gate. But what went on at that gate every day? What went on at that gate every day?
We knew this beggar was there every day.
Okay, well, made of Corinthian brass. It had thicker gold and silver plates on it. And it was at this beautiful gate that Luke tells us here about an unlovely scene. An unlovely scene at first. But it was a scene that became a beautiful scene later on.
The cripple was laying there.
Okay, the cripple was laying there. In Acts chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. And a certain man lame from his mother's womb was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful. Who was laid daily at the gate. Now, how long had this gone on?
Well, I'm sure not just since birth, but probably, since he had not been very old.
Okay,
After he lay there every day to bed.
okay,
Probably 5 or 6 years old. I don't know.
okay. And I'm like Jen, I don't believe it was the day after he was born he was laid there. But it is long enough that all the regular people who entered into that gate knew something about him. What did they know about him?
He had been lame.
That he had been lame from his mother's womb. What does that mean to be lame?
Can't walk.
Okay, can't walk. He is crippled in some way. And how long has he been crippled? All his life. From the very time in which he was born. And so he was laid there at the temple long enough that people knew he had had this condition since he was born. So that could have been, well, perhaps several years that this had happened. Well, why did they lay him at the beautiful gate?
To beg for money.
Okay, to beg for money. We're told here in verse 2 to ask alms. Now, what is alms? What is alms? Or what is he asking for here, in other words?
I thought it was money, but maybe I'm wrong.
Are you?
I don't know, I'm looking.
You looking? What does it mean? Alms. Well, the word alms in the Greek means charity or donation to the poor. I'm like, hey, now wait a minute. Doesn't say anything about him being poor. Well, but he had no way to work, did he? He has been lame since birth. He has been crippled since birth. Was there welfare in that day?
No.
No. Was there any way of him supporting himself?
No.
No. Was there any payments he got for his disability? No. There wasn't any of those things that we have today. So what was left for him to do in order to support himself? He had to beg. He had to beg. He had to ask people for some help. Why at the Beautiful Gate? Why at the Beautiful Gate?
People would be coming in and out of the temple.
Okay.
And usually it was the higher ups that was going in and out of the temple a lot.
Okay. Well, that's exactly right. You've got to remember, based upon what we're told here, what we're led to believe here in this chapter, that Beautiful Gate was going into the temple area. How many people would go by him on a daily basis? We really don't know. But you've got to figure that there would be multitudes of people that would go by him on a daily basis. And so they laid him there with the hopes that what would happen?
That somebody would, this is donations.
Okay.
A donation for charity.
Okay, donation for charity.
And it would be a place where religious people would be going in, so probably won't
Okay.
get something.
Okay. A place where religious people would go in. What hour did this occur?
The ninth hour.
Okay, this occurred at the 9th hour. At the 9th hour. The 9th hour was what time?
3 o'clock.
3 p.m. 3 p.m. Now hang on to that. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But the hope was that who said the religious people? Okay, the hope was, Dave said that religious people are going to be going by there. Yeah.
Because the prayer time.
Because it was a prayer time. And we're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. But the hope was that all of these people that were going in, they were going in for prayers and other things. And so the hope was they would see him laying there, they would have pity on him, and they would do what? They'd give him money. Is that a pretty good idea?
Good plan.
Yeah, pretty good idea. Because when are we the most generous? Stop and think about it.
On our way to church.
On our way to worship, we are the most generous. Or while we're in worship. Or right after we leave worship. We are the most generous of people. When should we be generous? All the time. But it's when we are on our way to worship that we feel a little bit more generous. And so that was the hope here. That they would see him, they would have pity on him, and they would give him some money to live on. Is that a beautiful sight?
No.
To see someone crippled or lame, or even to see somebody blind. It's not a beautiful sight. We have all seen things like that, haven't we? Now, not so much anymore. Now, I can tell you can go to Guyana, and you can go into Georgetown, and you will see those that are in the laying on a sidewalk, laying on a piece of cardboard, and they're holding out their hands. The things that go on in Guyana today are not the things that went on again back then. Because the things that go on in Guyana today is, at a certain time, those people that are all twisted up, they get up and they walk away.
Not like here.
Yeah. But it was not always that way. We have all seen someone crippled or someone lame sitting in front of a grocery store or somewhere, and they were asking for money. I'll long remember as as a boy growing up in Clarksburg. There was an old gentleman that sat out on Main Street. And he would be in different places depending upon the time of day or depending upon the crowd. Sometimes he would be in front of the Five and Dime, so that tells you how long ago it was. Sometimes he would be in front of J.C. Penney. Sometimes he would be down in the plaza of the courthouse. And he would be sitting on a little camp stool, a little wooden stool. He'd have a tin cup in one hand, and he would have a bell in the other hand, and he'd just sit there, ding, 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 ding. Now somebody might say, well, he might be faking, not this guy. Because you see, he had no eyeballs. Completely empty sockets. And he didn't wear glasses or anything of that nature to cover it up. He had no eyeballs. And I can remember my brothers and I, as we were little, and that was back when we didn't have malls. You went to the store, you went on Main Street. And I can remember my brothers and I holding our mom's hand or our dad's hand, walking down the street, going into J.C. Penney's or something of that nature, and they would hand us, each of us, $1. And we would go up and we would put that $1 in his cup, and he was always thankful for that. And I can remember as a young boy looking at that man and seeing the condition that he was in and thinking how terrible that is to live in that way. And so it wasn't a lovely sight. This wasn't a lovely sight either. There were people who knew that he was in that condition from birth. And so he wasn't faking. He was truly lame. It wasn't a very pretty picture. But something was about to happen. Something was about to happen. Peter and John would be going into the temple. Okay. In verse 1 we are told, now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. Now we asked just a little bit ago, the 9th hour is what time? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, what took place at the temple? Prayer. Prayer took place. An hour of prayer. In fact, the Jews would pray in the temple area several times throughout the day. Now, according to Numbers in the Old Testament, there were 2 daily sacrifices that had to take place in the temple area. That was according to the Old Testament law. One of those sacrifices happened at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so at 9 o'clock in the morning, the Jews would go to the temple, the high priest would make the sacrifices, and the Jews would pray for the first time that day. They would return to the temple area at noon, and they would pray again. And then at 3 o'clock, when the second of the daily sacrifices was being made, the Jews would return and pray for a third time. All right. So Peter and John were going into the temple at the hour of prayer. Why were they on their way to the temple?
To pray.
Okay. That's probably a pretty good answer. One scholar that I read, and it was only one scholar who said this, but one scholar I read said they were going to the temple to participate in the Old Testament sacrifices. Okay, now, why does that not, I'm just guessing, that doesn't sit well with you.
No.
Okay, now, why does that not sit well with you?
Yeah.
Well, one reason people have been talking to, and the other reason is the law was abolished.
Okay, the law was abolished.
Nathan, I'm not getting the right thing here, okay? But, they were going there to teach other people.
Okay, all right, now hang on. Let's deal with one problem at a time. Okay. How do we know they were not going there to make sacrifices? Because what?
the old law had been abolished and they weren't, but didn't the Jews still keep the old law?
Huh?
They didn't have anything to show.
They didn't have anything to say because there had already been a sacrifice made.
Right.
Yeah.
Christ was the sacrifice. They no longer needed to make the Old Testament sacrifices. The apostles didn't. Okay? Now the Jews, they still didn't believe that Old Testament law was no longer in effect. But the apostles knew that Jesus was the one sacrifice. They didn't need to go make any more sacrifices.
And that's one of the first places they went to teach.
They went to teach. Now somebody said they went there to pray.
I did.
Okay, Janet said that, and I think John said that. Amen to that. But could there have been a second reason they went there?
To teach. Yeah.
They went there to teach.
Target-rich environment.
Huh?
Target-rich environment.
Okay, target-rich environment. God's just going to ask, who was there? The people who needed to know that Christ had made the only sacrifice that was needed now. And so they were on their way to pray, but they were also on their way because there was an audience there who needed to hear
You see with
the
Paul
gospel.
And other apostles, that's the first place they would go.
Paul's habit was to go into the synagogue whenever he entered into any city. Now his job was to go to who?
Gentiles.
Gentiles. But he was to first of all go to the Jews.
Go to certain places.
And so every place he went into, every city he went into, the first thing he did is he went into the synagogue. Because there was an audience. And that is what Peter and John here are doing. They are going because here is the audience. They wasn't going to sacrifice. They were going to pray and they were going to teach. Now let's bring in verses 3 through 6. Who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked alms. Okay, now we asked just a moment ago. What is alms? A donation. A donation. They were asking for a donation. They were asking for some charity. And so he sees Peter and John going into the temple. And so what's his habit? To beg. His habit is to ask for some help. And Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, "Look on us." And he gave heed unto them, expecting to receive something.
Yeah, it stands to reason that this, was not your typical dirty, beggar. That he was of, a certain class of family that he had to help support because of the prime real estate that he was in. And it says daily.
Yeah. Yep, daily. And so they brought him daily to that. So he had people to help him. And so he wasn't just
A dirty bum.
the dirty bum. He went there, he needed help. And so he saw Peter and John, and Peter said, "Look on us." And so he thinks Peter's going to give him something. Did Peter give him something?
Something much better than silver and gold.
Okay, something much better. Something much better. Peter then said, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have, I give thee." This is where we're going to stop here tonight. And I want you to think on that phrase. But such as I have, I give thee. Think about, what does that mean? What all does that involve? Such as I have, I give thee. And think upon this. This phrase is actually a descriptive phrase. Okay, now what do we mean by descriptive?
Describing what is.
Describes something. It describes something. This phrase describes Christianity. Think about that this week. And to try to determine to yourself, how and why does this describe Christianity? And here's where we're going to pick up. And we're going to share with you the things that Peter gave unto him, that was far better than silver or gold. We want to extend the invitation. If we have anyone here this evening who needs to come and to make things